In a world of equestrian glamour, a dark secret hides in plain sight.
What goes on, they just turn a blind eye to it.
When 21-year-old showjumper Katie Simpson is found dead in a house in Derry, her family and friends are told the cause was suicide.
Katie was mad for horses, full of mischief.
But that verdict never sat right with some, not when Jonathan Creswell was in the picture.
He was very, very charming, very kind of hypnotic.
There was an arrogance there.
Unbelievably cocky.
In the aftermath of Katie's tragic death, a small circle of brave women go to battle against a system that initially failed Katie, revealing the horrifying secrets she'd spent her short life keeping.
He was holding her there against her will.
They could see how he was treating her.
The beatings got so much worse.
He was controlling Katie.
What they uncover will shock their community and land Jonathan Creswell in court for murder.
I've never had somebody sit in an interview room and say that, ever.
This is Groomed, an investigative series from Crime World presents. A chilling tale of betrayal and complicity, exposing a monster who seemed untouchable, and the enduring quest for justice in the face of overwhelming fear.
None of it made sense, but that didn't mean it wasn't true.
Groomed, coming soon, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm in a part of the country where I have rarely ventured. The small village of Tynan is located just across the Irish border, between the towns of Monaghan in the Republic and Armagh in the north. I would describe it as a hamlet more than a village, although there is a church here, St Vindic's, which stands on a little hillock overlooking the graveyard. There, among the headstones, among the dead, is an epitaph to a young girl taken at the prime of her life. In loving memory of Katie, a much-loved daughter, sister, granddaughter and aunt. Passed away 9th of August 2020, aged 21 years. On a little stone butterfly is engraved a memory of a special daughter. No tears, no words can ever say how much we love and miss you every day. It's a warm August day and it's soon to be Katie Simpson's 4th anniversary. Flowers dance in the breeze and a little rosette sits on the headstone, left by a friend who remembers the happy times she and Katie spent riding horses over jumps and across fields, feeling the freedom blow through their hair. I stand for a moment in the fresh air and look down on the piece of earth where this girl now lies, silenced forever with the secrets of her death. The little cemetery where Katie Simpson is buried overlooks the cottage where she grew up, the place where the stables once stood, where she was drawn, mesmerised by the beautiful horses she would learn to ride and to trust. Journalist Tanya Fowles is sitting in my car, waiting patiently for me to take in this scene. She often stops by the graveyard to remember the auburn-haired girl whose death has become a crusade of truth and a battle of epic proportions against a system that failed her. She was here the day Katie was buried, lowered into her grave by a man who stole her childhood and her life, but who masqueraded as a mourner and a hero. Katie Simpson didn't pass away. She was brutally raped and murdered, her death staged as a suicide. That much we now know, thanks to Tanya and a handful of strangers and friends who fought to bring Katie justice in death. Tanya will be my guide, not only today, but throughout this dark story. It's a story that meanders through a world of showjumping and eventing, often regarded as one for the privileged, but which has been rocked by a tale so shocking that it's now only spoken of in whispers. I'd met Tanya earlier at the shop in Killylea, west of Armagh city, and from there we'd made the short drive to Tynan, chatting as we went. "Hold up, sorry, pull in," she suddenly directed me as I realised I'd almost driven right through Tynan. Blink and you'd miss it. An old stone cross dating from the 10th century, which sits in the middle of the village, or the 17th century stone sundial on the graveyard gatepost, might draw a historian here, but otherwise there's little to see except the horses. This is a community that has been steeped in equestrianism for centuries, and in more recent times, the Darton Ree stables became the heartbeat of the village. It's small, but they had the horses, says Tanya. In the mornings, people would come out to look at them going out for their exercise in the fields. The jockeys would ride them out and up the road, and the locals would come out to see them. And then, when the foals would be born, the children would want their photographs taken with them. If you lived here, you would have been drawn to the stables. A lot of kids helped muck out so they could be near the horses. It was the heart of the village. We are parked up on Chapel Hill Road. To our right stands St Vindic's with its stained glass windows and a single tall tower rising to overlook the landscape. Tombstones peep out over the crooked stone wall that surrounds the church. Opposite is a whitewashed village school and the stone cross. There's a row of houses known as Taylor's Cottages, and across the Abbey Road is the elegant house where Dr. Gillespie ran his surgery and where he started his Darton Ree stables, where champions were bred. The stables are gone and Dr. Gillespie is dead, but his children run the business now and have moved it to a bigger and more suitable premises some kilometres away. I suppose you could say there are two sects here. There are the ones who love horses, ponies, a donkey, or whatever stands on four legs. And then for others, it's a trade, a proper business. But what brings everyone together is the horses. There's a dry hunt here that everyone gets involved in, but there's no kill. The horses are the backbone of the place, explains Tanya. It's agricultural land that surrounds us. Sheep, beef and dairy. The land is good, and much of it has been owned by the same families for generations. I start the engine and we begin our tour. So you're going to see a stone on the left which will say Tynan, and believe it or not, when you drive through here and past the church, you are through the village, but I'm going to take you a different way, Tanya tells me. Take a right turn here, and now left. I steer the car out into the countryside, where we can see the fields and the white tape flapping in the wind that marks what was once the race training track. It was a really long track and good for getting the animals fit, but it's disused now because they've moved to other ground. I've driven around now a few times, out into the countryside and the rolling fields, and back through the village, but I'm confused. Tanya, where is the shop? I ask. She laughs and points out the single pharmacy, the only business in the town. There's a bus, she says, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and occasionally one at night. I grew up in Dublin, a city spread that now houses 2 million people, small by European standards, but quite a bit larger than Tynan. So you'd be totally trapped here then, I declare, and Tanya laughs. The border with the south is just minutes away. In fact, 10 minutes drive southwest would take you to Glasslough, a village in County Monaghan, dominated by the beautiful Castle Leslie, a former stately home now painstakingly restored to a luxury hotel, a favourite of celebrities and the well-heeled. As we drive, we see a dog lying on the side of the road, and Tanya tells me to pull in. Is he okay? He's not injured, is he? The dog, a border collie, is only playing dead. He observes us for an instant and then bolts off. Honestly, you wouldn't believe what I've brought home. I came in with a raven one day and my husband just said, "Where the hell are you going to put that?" I can see which of the sects Tanya is in. She loves horses and is a competent rider. In fact, she loves all animals, and she tells me she's the proud mother of a number of very demanding cats. "That's it, by the way," says Tanya. "There's nothing else to show you here. That's the extent of it. Believe it or not, Nicola, you've just finished with Tynan. So now I'll take you back to Caledon. We'll loop around." As we drive, she starts talking about Johnny. He was only about 19 when he came to work in Tynan, moving into a house in Caledon where he got state aid with the rent. I think what brought him here was Jill. As far as I know, she was already working for Dr. Gillespie. She was a jockey. Nobody knew much about Johnny's background then, just that he was from Derry, and there was a story about his father that he was rich but that he didn't really know him. He'd been raised by his grandparents and it seemed that he was very spoiled. A lot of people thought he was good looking, although I never did. He'd big rosy cheeks and floppy hair, but the younger girls reckoned he was gorgeous and he loved that. As we leave Tynan and head for the Coolkill Road to Caledon, we look at some newly built houses. Just while I remember, that is where the barn was. See, nothing is ever in all the one ground here. You have to cross roads and walk a bit. That was all sold off and developed, but that was the barn, and at 2 o'clock every day, Johnny used to disappear into the barn. Now you see the wee sign there. Go down Abbey Road and head on to Caledon. Fields fly past me on both sides, vast open landscapes where cattle and sheep graze. In the back, Tanya is condensing this story into a confusing mass of names and events. There is Abby Lyle and Hayley Robb, Jill Robinson and Christina Simpson. Then there is Paul Lusby, but we'll get to all that later. There are people from this place whose names we will protect, who didn't like Johnny or his ways. There's the young boy, Aaron McWilliams, who used to follow him round like a puppy. And then there's Katie, the reason I'm here. I'll show you where he lived in Caledon, and I'll show you where that thing happened with Abby, says Tanya. He took her there after he took her over the border. This is where she was rescued. The house was always known as the Jockey House because the man who owned it rented it out to them and they would be working in the surrounding area. He met Abby at a show jumping contest and got her number. We arrive in Caledon, a bigger village with a big wide market street. It's dominated by the large house where the Alexander family still live. Everywhere here is either owned or leased by the Caledon estate. The Earl is the big employer, but he doesn't be about that much. There are pretty stone houses that were built by the estate, but they've been sold on mostly. A lot of people were born in the estate grounds in the past. Their parents were labourers, and after a wee while, they'd buy a bit of land or they'd be gifted a bit and they'd build something. Then there are new developments. Johnny lived in Chestnut Manor, says Tanya. We find the house. It's in the corner of a small development, stone-clad and end of terrace. That's where he threatened to put her in a bath of bleach. He took her shoes and everything, says Tanya. But after he went to jail, he came back here and Christina was waiting for him. She and Jill supported him all the way through that, and they all had a big party for him when he got out of jail. It was incredible the way that happened. It was like a cult that he had built up around himself, and he was so young. The road will take us further from here, across the border to Donegal and to the stately Port Hall, north to Derry, and into a very dark world where a young man with rosy cheeks developed a power over women that would end in a tangled knot of murder and betrayal. This is no story of gangland crime where money motivates most and where death is simply another way of doing business. This will be a far more complex dive into the human soul and its depravities than the underworld ever throws up. For me, this journey began just 2 months before in a courtroom in Derry where 3 ordinary-looking women, Jill Robinson, Hayley Robb and Rose de Montmorency Wright, stood for sentencing, convicted of a betrayal of epic proportions. The Crown Court had heard that the case centred on the murder of 21-year-old showjumper Katie Simpson, who had died at the hands of Jonathan Creswell, who had raped her prior to her murder. But by the time the women stood in the dock, Creswell himself was dead by suicide, and they had been left to carry the can. Particularly pertinent to the sentencing exercise this court must now embark upon, he and others made efforts to cover up what he had done in the prelude to her death. Creswell tried to make her death look like a suicide. Together with others, he disposed of and interfered with evidence, with the inevitable consequence of misleading those investigating her death. Accounts were provided by Creswell and these defendants, which were intended to, and had the effect of protecting him from being suspected of or having a role in her death. Mr. Creswell himself created a fiction, pretending to others he had found Katie hanging in a stairwell from a strap, claiming she had taken her own life. These defendants did not know the truth about how she had met her death. However, they ascribed to and were complicit in his conspiracy of silence. Robb faced 3 indictments, one of withholding information and 2 counts of perverting the course of justice. Robinson was to be sentenced for perverting the course of justice and de Montmorency Wright for withholding information. All three were friends of Katie Simpson and her older sister Christina, who had been in a long-term relationship with Jonathan Creswell and was the mother of his 2 children. While prosecutors had at one point considered charging Christina, she had not been brought before the court. All 3 women were given suspended sentences for their roles in the cover-up, and as they walked free from court, their heads bowed, family members waited to drive them away from the waiting media. But far from being over, the story of what happened to Katie Simpson had really just begun. The small villages of Tynan in County Armagh, Caledon in County Tyrone and Glaslough in County Monaghan are separated by 3 county borders but just a few miles of road. Nestled north-east of Monaghan town and south-west of Belfast, they are surrounded by rolling grasslands and mature forests. Sheep and cattle farming is commonplace, and one of the largest herds of red deer in Ireland have bred there. Hedgerows introduced by English landlords in the 1800s to create boundaries between their tenant holdings dot the landscapes, and in May they are white with hawthorn blossom. Woodlands mark the seasons with their carpets of snowdrops, wild garlic and bluebells. Churches, Catholic, Presbyterian and Church of Ireland, stand on high points in the villages, while stone-built houses line the wide main streets. All 3 areas are steeped in reminders of stark times in the history of Ireland: British imperialism, famine and the peerage of the country directed by English monarchs. South of the border, the Castle Leslie estate, which dominates the tiny village of Glaslough with its population of 350, has been in the Leslie family since 1665. Handed down over 4 centuries, it is now run as a hotel by Samantha Leslie, who inherited it from her father Desmond, a Spitfire pilot who would later document his belief in UFOs in his book Flying Saucers Have Landed. Awash with stories of ancient politics, grand parties and ghosts, it was home to the many colourful characters of the Leslie family, who passed the estate down through chains of siblings and children. The Leslie family trace their ancestry all the way back to Attila the Hun, the ruthless and barbaric Hungarian, known for his military feats and credited as being the final destroyer of the Roman Empire. The first Leslie to come to Ireland was Bishop John, who in the 1600s built Raphoe Castle in County Donegal, defeated Cromwell's forces, married at the age of 67 and bought Castle Leslie, where he died, aged 100. Throughout the 18th century and into the 19th, descendant after descendant took on the estate and developed it. During the famine, a soup kitchen fed the starving. Fine furniture, art and ornaments were collected and passed down to the next custodians, while the vast family wealth eventually went south in a badly advised investment in Russian railway bonds. By the 1960s, the estate was in the hands of the eccentric Desmond, who tried to turn it into a viable business, opening a nightclub, Annabelle's on the Bog, in the rural backwater. A successful writer, he married twice, had 6 children, produced films and music, opened an equestrian centre and finally retired to France. Undoubtedly his business plans for his ancestral home and estate were thwarted by the Troubles over the border in Northern Ireland and the threat posed by IRA terrorists to those who lived in the big houses. By 1991, the estate and the vast expense of running it fell into the hands of Sammy, a child of her father's second marriage, who became its trustee in her early 20s and who was keen to follow Desmond's efforts to make it commercially viable and to keep it in the family. She set about returning it to its former glory and opening it to the public. Tea rooms funded a new roof for the old conservatory, guest rooms opened, and houses and buildings were sold while the castle was slowly returned to the showstopper it once was, with the help of EU cross-border funding. In 2001, Desmond died, aged 79, and while described in various obituaries as an eccentric and a spiritualist, he was also noted as being among the first Anglo-Irish big house guardians to try to turn his birthright into a viable business. By 2002, his daughter had begun to realise his dream when the estate hit world headlines as the venue for the marriage of former Beatle Paul McCartney and the model Heather Mills. For days, the media camped outside the gates of the castle, hoping to catch a glimpse of the couple and to be sure that the wedding was actually going ahead. In the event, the star of the show was not the superstar or his bride, but the madcap Sir John Leslie, an octogenarian disco dancer affectionately known as Uncle Jack, who slipped out the front of the castle, dressed in a kilt, and whispered to the world's press, "They're getting married on Tuesday, but it's a secret." After the celebrity nuptials, the reputation and facilities of Castle Leslie continued to grow as it was transformed into a hospitality powerhouse, a venue for weddings, romantic weekends and activity holidays. Sammy Leslie continued to live there while working full-time to keep it running and develop its stables, fisheries and guest accommodation. Until he died in 2016 at the age of 99, Uncle Jack mingled with guests, eating in the dining hall and telling those who would listen about his regular trips to Ibiza to party at Privilege, one of the world's biggest nightclubs. North of Glasslock and just 6 kilometres away, another of Ireland's big houses had a far darker history. Tynan in County Armagh, a village with a population of just 71 at the 2011 census, was dominated for centuries by the huge Gothic Tynan Abbey, built in 1750 by the Strong family and surrounded at one point by an estate of over 8,000 acres. By 1923, as vast estates like the Abbey came under attack for the first time, the family offered safe accommodation at the mansion to the British police force, the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Later, during the Second World War, it housed British, Belgian and American troops. However, the generosity that had worked as private security for the occupants during the War of Independence was not in place during the Troubles, and 21st of January 1981 would mark one of the most violent attacks on the aristocracy in the history of modern Ireland. By then the war was raging in Northern Ireland, where the Provisional Irish Republican Army sought an end to British rule through a campaign of violence. The Provos, as they were known, had emerged in 1969, following a split in the original IRA and the broader Irish Republican movement, and within 3 years had become the dominant faction. The Troubles had begun in 1970 following violence at civil rights marches. With support and funding from the Palestine Liberation Organisation and the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, the Provos took on the empire. A bombing campaign resulted in internment, which united Catholics in opposition to the government, adding fuel to the flames. Tensions increased further after Bloody Sunday in Derry in January 1972, when the British Army killed 14 unarmed civilians attending a civil rights march. By 1973, the Provos had taken their bombing campaign to London and to Birmingham, where 21 people were killed in pub bombings. Throughout the rest of the decade, the Troubles turned Northern Ireland into a war zone as loyalist and Republican paramilitaries carried out atrocities, bombings and assassinations. Belfast and Derry, the 2 largest cities, bore the brunt of the killings and became ripe recruitment grounds for young men on both sides of the divide. But the border counties too had built up violent brigades and were hugely active in both the fight and the smuggling that helped to fund it. One of the most dangerous groupings was the South Armagh Brigade. In 1974, the then Northern Ireland Secretary, Merlin Rees, christened the area Bandit Country. The East Tyrone Brigade of the Provos also had a reputation for savagery and were known as one of the most active paramilitary groups during the Troubles. No-go zones for the British Army and the RUC were created as the units pushed to expand their territory through murder and fear. The Strong family had lived at Tynan Abbey since 1711, and the vast property had been passed down through successive clergymen, merchants, landlords and staunch unionist politicians, many Oxford and Eton educated. Like the Leslie family, the Strongs hosted parties, collected fine art and furniture, and lived and died in splendour. In the mid-1800s, Sir James Strong, the 3rd Baronet, established the Tynan Hunt, which later merged into Tynan and Armagh Harriers. By 1939, Tynan Abbey had been passed to the 8th Baronet, Sir Norman Strong, a war hero who had fought at the Battle of the Somme before becoming an Ulster Unionist MP and later Speaker of the Northern House of Commons. He was also a prominent member of the Orange Order and leading member of the Church of Ireland, and until his death regularly served as rector of Tynan Parish Church. By 1981, Sir Norman was 86 and living at Tynan Abbey with his only son James in their huge property surrounded by 800 remaining acres of land. On the night of 21st of January, they were in the library, one of the few rooms they used. Up to 14 IRA men, later described as some of the most hardened Republicans from Armagh and Tyrone, arrived at the property and blew in the front door with a grenade. Sir Norman managed to let off a flare, but the IRA shot at the RUC men who arrived to help. A second police team was sent in, but by the time they got there, fires had been started in various parts of the house and firefighters were called in. When first responders from Portadown eventually got into the house, they found Sir Norman and James dead from gunshot wounds. The IRA issued a statement saying, "This deliberate attack on the symbols of hated unionism was a direct reprisal for a whole series of loyalist assassinations and murder attacks on the nationalist people and nationalist activities." The terrorists had destroyed the abbey, leaving only a shell of the building and ending 8 generations of the family's occupation of it. By 1998, the ruins of the building were demolished and the site levelled, leaving just the arch of the front door surround, while the land remained in the possession of Sir Norman's eldest daughter, Mrs. Daphne Marion Kingan, until her death in 2002, when it was passed down to her son, James Kingan. On the 40th anniversary of Sir Norman and James's death, Kingan told the BBC's Good Morning Ulster programme they were armed with submachine guns, grenades. They blew in the front door and found my grandfather and my uncle in the library. My grandfather was 86 and quite deaf, so always had the television on full volume. Kingan had been at his grandfather's funeral at Tynan, which was attended by hundreds of people from across Northern Ireland and Britain, from lords, politicians, church leaders to ordinary local people. Just 3 kilometres north of Tynan Abbey in Caledon, County Tyrone, the Alexander family had owned their vast estate since 1775, when James Alexander purchased it for the equivalent of €15 million in today's money. He had made his fortune in the East India Company, a stock company formed to trade with Asia across the Indian Ocean. The company was at its peak during Alexander's time, accounting for half the world's trade in commodities like salt, spice and silk, and it went on to rule large swathes of Pakistan and India. James Alexander built Caledon House, becoming Baron Caledon, then Viscount, and finally in 1800, the first Earl of Caledon. Under the second Earl, the village was created, with more than 200 stone houses and a school for Catholic and Protestant girls. Just like the Leslie estate and Tynan Abbey, Caledon was passed on through generations of family members over more than 200 years and is currently the home of the 7th Earl, Nicholas Alexander, and his wife, Lady Amanda Caledon. The Caledon estate was also targeted by the IRA during the Troubles, although no such atrocities like those at Tynan Abbey occurred. In 1972, a bomb caused extensive damage to the property, and a year later, 2 bombs were discovered on monuments in the grounds. In 1991, a provisional IRA unit targeted it again, spraying it with assault rifles. An IRA statement released afterwards claimed that the unit involved had fired over 700 rounds and that the British soldiers guarding it were the intended target, not the family in the house. The privileged living in the big houses of Ireland had been dwindling in number for decades. Since the beginning of the 20th century, deep-seated political unrest coupled with anxieties around their tenuous financial future in the modern world had seen many lock up their doors for good. The financial incentives offered under the Land Act of 1903 meant that many landlords sold up their piles and left their estates and farmland. Those who remained found themselves in ever smaller numbers in a fast-changing society. By the beginning of the 20th century, just 1,500 large estates remained in the hands of the gentry across the country. Fewer numbers meant more exposure to the growing movement against the unfair land purchase and peerage practices of the past. The first wave of the destruction of these houses came during the War of Independence, when they were identified as a powerful symbol of British colonialism and imperialism. In 1920, many houses were burned because their owners were seen as sympathetic to the Crown and because of long-held grudges that the lands had been purchased unfairly in the first place. During the Civil War of 1922, as the Crown forces withdrew, Republicans started to torch what they saw as symbols of colonialism. Artramon House in Wexford, Ballycarty House in Tralee, County Kerry, and Cavanagh in County Louth were just some of those demolished. In the north, too, homes were targeted and looted, amongst them Antrim Castle and Roxburgh Castle in County Tyrone. After the 1923 Land Act was passed, the Irish Land Commission redistributed thousands of acres and acquired under compulsory order many of the houses that had been damaged by fire. It also inherited many empty and abandoned estates, most of which were then demolished. The growing sense of isolation amongst the landed classes meant they often stuck together, and the proximity of Glaslough, Tynan and Caledon meant that the offspring and the wider families living there at any given time socialised together and even shared staff. Not only did their presence as the heartbeat of their local villages mean that they were steeped in the history of wars and great political dynasties, but they also brought to the small communities a love of horses and all things equine, creating employment and attracting outsiders to the opportunities they saw there. From the mid-1800s, when the Dublin Horse Show was established, becoming one of the most important events on the landed gentry summer circuit, everything changed. Throughout the 1900s, horse racing, show jumping and even horse breeding became more populist, and a series of Irish government initiatives turned what had been an elitist hobby into one of Ireland's most important and inclusive industries. In 1968, as Minister for Finance, Charlie Haughey, a keen horseman himself, introduced a tax exemption for stallion fees in the Finance Act. In response, some of the world's most famous breeders and richest owners from across the world, like Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum and the Aga Khan, bought up stud farms while their racehorses took to the tracks with IRE on their backs. Coolmore stud under John Magner grew and became recognised as one of the best in the world. In the Dáil in the 1970s, Haughey said, "Bloodstock breeding provides first-class employment in many areas where it would be impossible to provide employment of a similar calibre in any other way." The end of the Troubles was a welcome boost to a thriving sector. The economies on both sides of the border began to grow, and so too did job opportunities for many. In the early 2000s, Liam Connellan, the former president of the RDS, produced a report setting out the principles for a new organisation to represent all 32 counties as a governing body for all equestrian sport. The backbone of the report was that all disciplines, from dressage to racing, should come under the one body, which was eventually set up as Horse Sport Ireland in 2006. Within the next decade, the massive industry would be valued at more than €800 million to the Irish economy and provide over 14,000 jobs, largely in rural Ireland, and it was projected to continue to grow.